As a matter of fact, that's so cool. We're going to put our sunglasses on because we are pros at this apocalypse thing. Hello, and thanks for joining me. This is another edition of Apocalypse Talk, getting to know the cars of the long drive, and today I am excited to be talking about the VAZ2101. Actually, what we're looking at is a 2104 because it's the station wagon, but the VAZ was the car that basically saved the Soviet Union in a number of ways. It's an amazing story, and I can't wait to tell it to you. Let's get a look at this thing. Hope you're having a great day, by the way. Okay. And I'm gonna bring you a little knowledge. So, what you're looking at is probably a 1973 VAZ 2104. But the story of this car actually goes back to 1967 when the Fiat 124 won the European Car of the Year. So Fiat came out with this boxy little, three-box car design, not the kind of flamboyant flowing lines you might have expected from an Italian designer at the time, but actually pretty classic look. Not that we can really see it on this wagon, but you get the idea. Straight edges, simplicity, had basically this exact same grille. And the thing is that boxy design belied some kind of sporty features. Independent suspension on all four corners, which for the time was pretty advanced. Disc brakes on all four corners, which for the time was pretty advanced. Synchro meshes in all five forward gears, things like that. So when the Soviet Union decided that it needed a people's car that could raise Soviet morale, that could get the people of the Soviet Union mobilized and moving, that could suit their lifestyles and give them kind of, something aspirational, they looked at a number of contenders, but the Fiat won out, in part because Italy at the time had kind of a communistic, sympathetic government in place, and they knew that Fiat would be a more willing partner than a lot of other places. And they had themselves a pretty good product. So in 1970, just 3 years after this car won Car of the Year, the VAZ 2101 came out. Now, it had an internal name that started with a G, and the name was based on the mountains near the plant where it was built. But the mountain started with a G. Gilia? I think so. Gilia, I think, was the name of the original model name. Not an unpretty name, right? And these were different, though, than the Fiat 124 in a few ways. So when Russia decides it wants a car and tests it, they're going to test it in the Russian winter. And as you might have predicted, the Italian cars were not designed for, Russian winters, right? Fiats were not used to these kinds of conditions. So when the Russians tested the Fiat 124, they found that Russia messed with it in a number of ways. For example, those wonderful disc brakes at all four corners. Well, the Russian winter clogged up the rear disc brakes. They only lasted, a few hundred kilometers before they got worn out because they'd get so packed with ice and grit. All right, let's start this baby up, huh? Off we go. So, we're riding in a car with some aluminum rear drum brakes. An interesting idea to make the drums out of aluminum. The idea was that they would cool better. Now, of course, their stopping power is not so great because aluminum's a pretty soft metal. But, kudos for thinking outside the box, Vaz. And at least they didn't jam up with slush and grit in the Russian winter. The other thing the Russians figured out was that the frame, the chassis of the 124 was too weak for Russian potholes and bumpy roads. They were actually cracking frames, so the Russians decided that they would reinforce the chassis in a number of pretty key places. And to go along with that was also thicker sheet metal to kind of sturdy the car up. it got thicker metal than the Fiat did. It ended up weighing a total of like 200 pounds more than its Fiat equivalent at the time. Also changed was the suspension. The Vaz had a higher suspension to clear the crummy, bumpy, primitive roads of Russia. It also got a softer suspension for that same reason, so that it could absorb the bumps more easily. The bushings and things in the Fiats were just breaking down under the pummeling, punishing roads. Are we sure what happened there? Felt like we hit an invisible rock. So raised, softened suspension, thicker metal, reinforced chassis, and then, in kind of an impressive move, Vaz decided that the engine in the Fiat could be a little more advanced. So they made their own overhead cam 1.2 liter. Now we got a structure over here, huh? All right, check this out. The overhead cam engine never actually got into a Fiat, but it was more advanced than the Fiat motors were at the time. As a matter of fact, Fiat liked the changes so much that it borrowed some of them for its own motors. Liking it so far? The Russians sure did. The other thing it had that was meant to cope with, nasty Russian environment was that the earliest versions of the Vaz got a hand crank for the engine, so that, if in the bitter cold of the Siberian winter, your battery wouldn't crank the car over on a cold start, you had like a handle sticking through the grill. You could crank that sucker like a tractor and start it up by hand. That way you wouldn't be stranded. Same thing with the fuel pump. There was an auxiliary fuel pump, like a hand pump, so that a person could pump the fuel themselves. I think maybe it was a crank. But anyway, they could pump the fuel themselves as they drove if they needed to. If the fuel pump froze up, clogged up, went out. So the car was designed to have some redundancy so that it wouldn't strand you no matter how harsh the conditions were. And that made perfect sense to the Russians. So, as you can imagine, every Russian wanted to get their hands on one of these, and the waiting list was long, even though the automotive plant where these were built was the absolute flagship of Russian automotive plants. In fact, it was so efficient that it won a bunch of awards, and it was cranking out at one point in its history. It was making like over 600,000 cars a year, and yet the waiting list for a Vaz was years long for the Russian people. I think it got down to just a year. And I'm going to interrupt the talk of the Vaz to talk about another very Soviet feature of the game that just came up with a new update, the AK-47. What we're seeing here is a clip. I haven't seen the gun yet, not in person. I haven't found one for myself. But if we find ourselves an AK-47, we're going to have to take it. It's basically a requirement. Now, what can I drop? There we go. Okay. Oof. Well, we've already noted in the past how the apocalypse is not short on poop, right? Interesting. Did Timmy fall down this well? Ooh. If I fall down that well, I will not be able to get out. That's how this game works. You fall down a well and you are just screwed, which I suppose kind of realistic. This is why I don't just jump down wells out of curiosity. Now, there is a small chance you'll find a broom at the bottom of the well. And I know that doesn't sound like much consolation, but we're talking Harry Potter style brooms. They will fly you out of the well. Maybe the apocalypse is just magic like that. But we don't need magic when we're in a Vaz. Come on, 2104. Look at it just flying up this hill like a tiger. Okay, not really, but... But in the world of the long drive, this is a pretty solid car to have. It's not just the Russians who thought this was good. I mean, back behind us, if... hang on here. as you can see, I took the seats out of the rear of the car, and this thing is voluminous. It will haul some major stuff. I can put drums of fuel back there if I want. Are we ready for a little demonstration? It's the apocalypse. We need a car that can haul some stuff, right? Like maybe, basically, a whole nother car. What car should you have? Let me tell you. I think it's the VAZ. One tire. Two tires. Can it swallow three tires? Yeah, you bet. Keep it coming, right? How about this whole extra engine for a VAZ2105? Sure. Let's put that in there. Oh, look, here's a Trabant motor. Who wants one of those? Nobody. But you know what? We can take it with us anyway, because why not? It'll fit. What else might be handy during the apocalypse? Maybe some jerry cans. Maybe some bullets. I mean, sure, why not? Maybe another tire. Yeah? I mean, we need 4, just in case all 4 wheels fall off or something. I don't know. Who knows? Who cares? I could probably carry another 4 tires past this if I wanted to. Oh, look, a shovel. That might come in handy. Who knows? Right? Can that go in there? Sure it can. You bet. As a matter of fact, that's so cool. We're going to put our sunglasses on because we are pros at this apocalypse thing. The motor's capable of some speed. The chassis is, pretty balanced, pretty well sorted. It's not too, too random, too darty or anything. It doesn't have the bad habits of, say, the Trabant or the Skoda when its front end is light. So this is a decent car in this game. It was also such a decent car in the real world that when Fiat stopped making the 124 in 1974 and VAZ was able, under license, to start selling the VAZ in markets that the Fiat previously had been sold in, because VAZ initially wasn't allowed to compete with the Fiat 124 in any of its markets. But when the Fiat 124 stopped being produced by Fiat, then the VAZ could be sold in places like Britain, Sweden, all kinds of places, right? Norway. And it was very popular in those places. It came to market in Britain, for example, in 1974, and it sold a bunch of cars like this wagon that we're rolling around in right now. And that's because this was only a 7-year-old car design. A car that had been very advanced for its time and had won Car of the Year only 7 years before that. And here it was coming to market as a pretty cheap car in England. And I'm forgetting the exact figures, but cheap. Cheap enough to be a pretty decent alternative to whatever else you were going to buy. That's just more road up there. Okay. So that's part of the reason why Russia was cranking out 600,000 of these things a year, was because the foreign markets were gobbling them up, and it was really, VAZ's profits were helping Russia stimulate its economy. It was helping Russia have money to trade for things it couldn't produce for itself. The Russian economy, true to form, was really pretty insulated from the rest of the world, but there were certain things they couldn't make for themselves. They just couldn't. So they needed some money for trade, and selling the VAZ overseas made them a lot of money. Now, the thing is, foreigners didn't love VAZ. Like me, they couldn't really produce the Russian words, pronounce the Russian words. And in fact, the what was it called again? Galia? I'm forgetting the name of this car in Russia. Besides VAZ2101 or for the internal designations, it had that name for those mountains. I'm forgetting it. It starts with a G. Sorry. The thing is, foreigners didn't really like pronouncing that name either. It sounded too much like Gigolo or something, supposedly. But to make it more marketable to foreigners, they rebadged it not as a VAZ, but as a Lada. L-A-D-A. Lada having an insignia that looked like a Viking longboat. And I want to say Lada meant something like Explorer or something. So off it went to market, and it sold and sold and sold. As a matter of fact, the 21, the early series here, sold virtually unchanged from 1970 until 1984. This car sold around the world essentially as delivered in 1970. It was selling strong all the way to 1984 when it was replaced by the 2105, which is basically the same car with a few changes. We'll take a look at them because the 2105 is also in this game, and we'll do a whole episode on the 2105 and the changes it had. But it's really this same car, more or less, and it was produced, believe it or not, all the way up till 2015. Yeah, I think Egypt was the last place to be producing it, but crazy, right? And say what you will about these cars, that alone tells you that these cars were well designed in 1970, I guess, when they came out. For them to have had that kind of lifespan is stunning. It's a testament to Russia's unwillingness to spend more money on a new car design, but it's also a testament to the fact that this one kept going and kept selling that long, right? And in the game, in the world of the watch out, rocks. Oh, this might have raised suspension, but it's not that high. In the game of the long drive, this is one of the better cars to get. This is a good one. And for the same reasons the Russians loved it when you and I are hiking across the desert and throwing everything we have into this car, it just keeps going. And we just keep running into parts for it. You gotta love that, right? Okay, let's give ourselves a little look. Now, something interesting is, this being the wagon, this rear hatch, this wagon rear hatch on these things just kept getting used all the way up into the 2105. So those Ladas, the Lada Riva that was being produced up into the 2000s would have still looked exactly like this in the back. They just kept using the same taillights, the same hatch. They occasionally, at different times, like 1984 as was one of them, they gave the Lada Riva 2105 series kind of a revamp in a number of different ways. We'll talk about that when I get to that car. But they never changed the back of the wagon. The station wagons never got a styling update in the back here. So you're looking at the back of a car that was well, this rear end was crossing the world from 1974 all the way up to, well, today. I suppose it's still driving around, but it was being produced until just a few years ago. Looking just like this. A bus stop. And I think this is a good time for us to stop. Now, I feel a little sad that we didn't find any of these new update features. We didn't find an AK-47 or anything in today's video, which would have been fun to play with. But maybe on the next go-round, right? Maybe we'll get lucky. Maybe we'll find an AK to go with it, and then we'll get really Slav, and we'll just have some fun. Okay? So, thanks for joining me. Thanks for learning a little bit about the VAZ. I love learning about these things too, so I'm going to bring you another one soon. See you then.